What the fiqh?
Bismillah walhamdulillah wa salatu wassalam ala rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to another episode of What the Fiqh. I am your host, Bona Muhammad, and I am joined today with a very special guest, a brother who has become close to me in the last few years, and someone who I think is a major asset to the Muslim community. Although, unfortunately, his circumstances weren't the pleasantest. That's not. I don't know if that's a word. Pleasantest.
It is.
But okay, it is. Okay, but you becoming more entrenched in the community, I think, has major positive repercussions. So, brother Yusuf Faqiri is joining me here today, and I don't know if you want to tell. Maybe we should talk a little bit about you and your family, particularly your brother Soleiman. Allah yarhamah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy on him.
Ameen.
And I think your story is obviously it's very tragic. It's very sad. And you know this, but I'll just share it for the viewers that I actually reached out to you initially. I had seen the campaign you had done, and I had seen a lot of the buzz you were getting. I had seen you do a few events, I think in some universities, and you were getting certain speakers out. And when I kind of read up on the case and I saw your enthusiasm for getting justice for your brother, I said, you know what, subhanAllah, I'd love to speak with this brother. I'd love to, see whatever way I can help. Because I think it is one of those things that kind of gets swept under the rug, especially within the Muslim community. So maybe you can talk a little bit about your brother's circumstances, what led to his untimely, unfortunate death at the hands of prison officials in this country. So maybe you can talk a little bit about his life and his journey and unfortunately how it ended.
Absolutely, Bona. It's an honor to have you with us, on our side. I always tell people I'm an extremely ordinary person who's being given an extraordinary responsibility to honor the extraordinary person was Soleiman, Allah yarhamu. And so I'm humbled to honor him, but not obviously in the circumstances that I want to. But Soleiman was truly a special man, and he was gifted both academically, athletically, and although his life took a very difficult turn with this illness known as schizophrenia, Soleiman's legacy has remained quite profound on every single one of us in my family. And before I talk about his circumstances, of his death, if I may want to share his personal life, if it's okay with you. Every single member of my family has been touched by Soleiman on a personal level in terms of like what he left with them. I'll give you an example. So when he was studying engineering at Waterloo, he got into a car accident, and it was after this illness that he got diagnosed with this illness known as schizophrenia. But what never stopped after his illness or throughout his life was that he was known as an intellectual his entire life. He said, I'm a student of knowledge. He was always throughout his life attached to ilm. He would always say to me, I'm attached to ilm, Yusuf. And the reason I bring this up is when after he was diagnosed with his illness, although he didn't finish his studies at Waterloo, he ended up deciding to pick up Arabic. So he went and he learned and became fluent in Arabic.
And your family's originally from
Afghanistan,
right? So Arabic wouldn't have been your first language.
No, Farsi was Farsi, right. And then English second. But what happened was my mom did not know how to read Arabic, and so when she was trying to learn the Quran, he actually taught her the Quran and Arabic on his own. He was my mom's teacher. And I think for the audience, for them to listen, is that if there's anything that for people to listen about Soleiman, his life, is that if there is someone that that's suffering from a mental illness, and I mean this respectfully to our wonderful Muslim community, we have to do a better job as a community to really understand and appreciate our loved ones that are suffering from mental illness. It's our duty and responsibility. And so Soleiman never allowed his illness to define him. And I want for our audience that if they have a loved one suffering from these illnesses, don't let your loved one be defined. They have so many gifts, right? The last thing you want to do is ostracize them, make them feel devalued. And you can do it sometimes in subconscious ways without really knowing. Like, you should always remember that all they're looking for a lot of the time is just for you to listen. And so Soleiman showed that to my family. Like I said, he taught my mom, how to read the Quran. Personally, for me, as I was becoming closer to my faith, he actually taught me how to pray.
SubhanAllah.
So, and that's his legacy. And every time I pray, when I make dua for him, the words that emanate from my heart, that I, when I talk to my Rabb, Soleiman gave me that knowledge, and that's something that we're a better family for, and we're better people. And I hold on to those parts of Soleiman that has given me some light, considering that the last 3 years have been anything but light, Bona. It's been a very nightmarish, difficult 3 years for my family.
And so I see, obviously, this is something that, it's interesting to me, because I know you speak about him a lot, and you travel the country, you go to different communities, but it still touches you each time you remember and reminisce about your brother. So, even the sadaqah jari that he left behind through this knowledge, we can see, inshallah, is a good sign from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Inshallah.
That there are people still thinking about him, there are people still making dua for him, there are people that are still benefiting from his legacy.
Inshallah.
So, this is, of course, how he passed away was not beautiful, but this is a sign of hopefully a beautiful end.
Absolutely, inshallah.
Right? But we'll talk about his death. And I do think it's important for the community to hear about what happened to your brother.
Absolutely.
It's not one of those things that I want people to just kind of brush over. Because sometimes, in newspapers, we'll see a headline, such and such person dies in custody. But we never really understand or hear the context by which they met this particular end.
Absolutely. And it was a very violent death, Bon, as you'll see, very violent, as
Yeah.
you'll see in our conversation.
Yeah. So talk me through what happened towards the end of his life. He was diagnosed with schizophrenia. He left the University of Waterloo, right?
Yes.
It's a university for those who are not in Canada and don't know. And he was studying engineering at the university.
The most competitive
Yeah.
university in the country when it comes to engineering.
Wow.
The most, Bona.
But he began his kind of journey of seeking knowledge as well. So he was a talib al-ilm, and he was, learning Quran, learning Arabic, and he had this journey of trying to come closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Talk me through what happened
Absolutely.
in the last few months.
So, Bona, schizophrenia, for the audience, if they don't have experience with knowing someone with this illness, it's a very debilitating and a very challenging illness. And oftentimes, the difference between someone being able to live a decent life or versus a difficult life is family support. And although this illness took a lot from him, we as a family, through our own limitations, but through my mom's leadership, accepted him for who he was. So sometimes, for example, this is across the board with schizophrenia. Not everybody, the extremes, the extreme part of the illness, it depends on a case by case, but some things are consistent with everyone that suffers from schizophrenia. And one thing, for example, is that people that suffer, that have this illness, they suffer from insomnia. So they always will have difficulty with sleeping. And Soleiman was no different in that area. So what we would often do is when he was sleeping, we would take shifts. So my mom would sleep in his room. I would, my other brothers.
Wow.
I saw his pain often when he often said to me, he said, "Yusuf, I never chose this illness, but it took a lot from me." He would often say that, I can't do certain things because of what this illness did to me. But what was inspiring, though, is that, his resolve, his resilience, he had to take an extreme level of medications, whether it was, certain psychosis, whatever types of medications. He had to take all these medications. And it took a lot from him, Bona, but it was his strength that actually showed us how special he was.
And so he's taking a lot of these different medications. His life has been altered drastically. He can't do normal things. And I know we spoke in the past, and you told me that, he even feared the future. What would happen? How would he get married? How,
Yes.
Because we don't think about that how did he envision his future playing out?
Absolutely. It's a very important point, Bona, because like he, oftentimes, because of the stigma, and that's why I believe as a community, we have to do a better job. The stigma, we use sometimes derogatory words. I like to use crazy, psychotic, insane, words that we just use in our daily language that can be, it's quite offensive. And when Soleiman often heard this among our community members, sometimes it broke his heart. Even myself, one time I made a mistake and I said, don't be crazy, bro. And this was at the beginning of his illness. I share this part because, just to show, like, he went upstairs in his room and he put all the medications that he took, the ones that he took daily, he took in a glass. He says, you think I chose this, Yusuf? Have some decency, have some compassion. And he started crying. And after that, I hugged him. I told him, I love you, bro. So like things that we would take for granted as us that don't suffer from mental illness, a lot of those things were very, what's the word? Not stable in the sense like they were not guaranteed, right? It was always roller coaster, right? Not showing, not only do you know if your community accepts you, greater society accepts you, but this is where my mom's like leadership really went a long way in that. Like that's what kept him alive, Bona, was, it kept him alive 11 years longer because my mom took us together as a family and said, you're going to accept my son for who he is. But it wasn't easy. It was very difficult, not because of Soleiman, but because the system, and generally the system makes it very hard for you, to create certain support bases. If you don't have a family, you are out, you're out in a very difficult situation. Definitely. And, whether it's getting them housing, whether it's, taking them to the doctors, whether it's telling them that, you need to do this or this. Now imagine Soleiman didn't have my mom and dad. Imagine you were a single mother. Imagine you were a newcomer. Imagine you were First Nations. It'd be much harder.
Of course.
And not only is this illness are difficult to begin with, but the system, the everyday system does not make it easy at all. But we as a family did what we could with our limitations, Bona. And I always say is that it was my mom's unflinching love. It was her faith that actually gave him what made him survive and in many ways sometimes thrive. Everybody knew Soleiman, through in our small community within the Afghan community. They always knew him as a very intelligent man, Bona. Rarely would his illness come out. That speaks volumes to the man that he was, but also to the work ethic and my mom's ability to doing that.
I always wonder how many people in prison, for example, do suffer from mental health issues. A lot of times the prison population, as we see it, everyone in prison is a criminal and, but there are many people who have illnesses, and especially when they're in that system, they're not treated with that compassion, with that support to help them in their journey, right? And it could be something that is keeping them from integrating or keeping them from getting back into society. So I want to talk about this part, and then I want to talk more about your brother's story, because I think, people might be curious as to what exactly happened. So your brother got in a bit of an issue with some neighbors, just a minor kind of misunderstanding, something that occurred, and he was arrested.
He was arrested, Bona, and normally, basically, the police they were aware that he had a mental illness, and they would have taken him to a hospital. Instead, they took him to a jail. And when this incident happened, my family was not there. And so what's very important about this jail as well, we in Canada, in Ontario, we have this organ of government called the Ontario Ombudsman that oversees jail complaints. That jail was actually the most complained jail. Wow. That Lindsay jail, which was also known as the Central East Correctional Center, was the most complained jail in the entire province of Ontario. I also want to touch on your point about other people suffering from mental illness, if I may, Bona, is that the numbers are almost around 60%.
60% of prison population.
That have mental illness. And I've spoken with other families, that have had their loved ones that have had mental illness, and they're still in pain. There's a fella by the name of Justin Saint-Amour who had schizophrenia that died 8 days before Soleiman's death in the Ottawa jail. 2 months later, there was another fella by the name of Cass Geddes, also suffering from schizophrenia, died in the Ottawa jail. There's another fella in Thunder Bay, a First Nations man, an artist, had bipolar disorder, died in the Thunder Bay jail. A year before Soleiman's death, there was a Somali brother who had bipolar disorder that died in the Lindsay jail. That was staying in the Lindsay jail. And what you notice with all these cases, including Soleiman's, it lacks a couple of things: accountability, no transparency, and these individuals were all put in segregation. It's like people with mental illness should be treated differently.
Sure.
Not in the sense of looked down upon, but in the sense that they should be treated with compassion and respect and decency. But they're not. Usually, people always react. They're not proactive. They're rather reactive, and that's a problem.
It is 100%. And of course, in that circumstance, and especially because your brother's circumstance was already known by police.
Yes.
So the fact that they, against better judgment, against his own safety, decided to bring him to a prison. How did you guys find out he was in the prison? Like, was it that he got a chance to call you from there, or did they call you?
You know, Bona, when the day that he was taken from us on that December 4th, it was literally the last time we physically were able to see him. The next time he was given to us was in a body bag. You know, I was informed by my sister on December 4th, later on that evening, that he was taken temporarily into custody. What I did, what every family would do, I mean, and as a family, we're a very close-knit family, we did everything to get him help. But at the same time, we try to give him support too. And what happened was, everything we did, we were literally, pushed against the wall, in the sense that, like, my family tried to visit. So for the audience to know, Lindsay's about 45 minutes from our hometown of Ajax, Ontario. My parents drove physically 3 times to Lindsay to see Soleiman. I, myself, with my brother Sorab, physically drove to Lindsay the 4th time to see him. Every single time we went, we weren't able to see him. And to this day, almost 3 years after his death, we have not been told why. And the one time that I went and saw him, I went and I met with staff, and I articulated with staff that Soleiman had schizophrenia. In addition to the fact that he was diagnosed with this illness 11 years, so was well documented. And then the much more worse tragedy is that 3 days before Soleiman's death, I actually made arrangements. An Ontario judge actually ordered Soleiman to be transferred to a hospital. And the only reason he wasn't transferred, Bona, was because he was waiting for a bed. Now picture this: the family does everything they can, but the system,
working against them,
working against us. And I always say to people, it took my mom 11 years to keep Soleiman alive. It took the justice system 11 days for them to kill him. It's 11 years versus 11 days, Bona.
So when you guys found out he was in prison, you immediately made arrangements to go and visit him, to communicate with the staff in the prison. What was their response? I mean, they didn't allow you to see him, but what was their excuse? Like, what exactly did they say?
It was very cold. You can't see him. It was very terse, that said you can't see him. There was nothing else. We weren't able to communicate with him.
He didn't get any calls or anything like that?
No, Bona.
Really?
Like, we didn't. We weren't, like, we tried to make all arrangements to see him, and none were made. And to this day, we have not been told why we weren't able to see him. And remember, what's important too, this was a man that was there for 11 days. This was not someone that, was there for an extended period of time, was not someone that did not have a family support. Soleiman had everything for him from a family perspective, but the system did not allow that. And people should be alarmed, whether audiences are listening within Canada or also outside of Canada, is that, like, we usually pride ourselves within the system.
Sure,
and Canadians at large need to be alarmed, because this happened to Soleiman. It also happened to others as well. But what makes Soleiman's story, also unique is that, in some ways, is that he was temporarily in custody. He was never supposed to be there to begin with, Bona. Right? This is very important.
It was pretty much accidental that he ended up there.
Yeah, he was supposed to be at a hospital.
Yeah. So now I want to relive this moment with you. I know it's not a pleasant one, but so he's there for 11 days. You guys are in constant trying to get in contact with him. It's not going your way. What is how do you hear from the prison, or what are you told to let you know that something happened?
So the night, it's scary how I remember this night in detail, because it was the most difficult night of my life. I remember it was Thursday night, December 15th. I was in my room upstairs. My mom and dad were downstairs. My 2 brothers were out. And my nephews and nieces were around the house. I was around 8 or 9 o'clock. and two Durham police officers, knocked on my family's door, and they informed my father that Soleiman had passed away. I was not there at that moment because I was in my room. My sister runs upstairs and barges in my door and says, Soleiman's dead. And I come downstairs and I saw the scariest thing in my life is that my mom is a very, very strong woman. She's the rock of my family. And I saw her pacing. And talking to herself, saying, my beautiful son is gone. My beautiful son is gone. My beautiful Soleiman is gone. And saying this in Farsi. I often try not to think about this because it was a very scary thing to see because I've never seen for obvious reasons, I've never seen my family in such level of distraught, difficulty, and especially my mother, and like literally walking back and forth in the kitchen. And that was, Bona, literally the most information we had for about 8 months.
Wait, so they told you he passed away, but they didn't tell you how, or?
No, we were told Soleiman passed away after guards entered his cell. That was it.
It's very vague.
That was it. So for 8 months, literally no information. Thankfully, we as a family made a proactive decision, an important decision. We hired, a lawyer, in Toronto, Ontario, named Nader Hassan, and someone who's an incredible human being and an even better like lawyer. He's an amazing person, and he was there like advocating with us, him and another lawyer by the name of Edward Morocco. But my lawyers, had to fight tooth and nail for information.
So they told you that there was an incident where the guards had come into the cell.
Yes.
And then they didn't disclose anything after that.
In terms of the details, the real details came out, I believe, in June 2017, when the coroner did a very important and a fulsome investigation. And in this investigation, the coroner highlighted some of the facts that you and I have previously spoke, is that in the coroner's report, at the time of Soleiman's death, both his legs and his hands were tied. He was pepper sprayed twice. He had a spit hood. Multiple guards were involved. And there was 50 bruises on his body. A significant number of these bruises, the coroner termed it medically as blunt impact trauma. Those were the last few minutes of Soleiman's life. I don't think about those things often, because if I do, a part of me is eaten away. A part of me is already gone. But the violence that he endured, no human being deserves to endure that, especially a man who needed help, who as we say in Arabic, miskin, masoom, But I have hope. I always have hope in my Creator. And alhamdulillah, we've had amazing people helping us, across this country, across Canada, both Muslims and non-Muslims that have come to support us because of seeing this injustice. But the personal pain that my family has gone through, it's difficult, but our pain pales in comparison to the pain of Soleiman. And my pain personally pales in comparison to the pain of my mother. And you have to ask yourself a question is, what possesses any individual to apply force to a mentally ill man when they're literally defenseless? They often call this, this situation as an altercation with the guards. I don't know if anybody will call this an altercation when you're tied up.
Yeah.
These are facts, what I just articulated. This is not an opinion. Bona, the 50 bruises, the legs being the hands being tied, and he's being in segregation, and pepper spray twice. This is all from the coroner's report.
Did you immediately suspect foul play? Like, did you guys get a chance to wash his body?
So Bona, so that's another story that I like to share, is that like when during the janaza, There was bruises throughout his entire body. There's a huge gash in his forehead, in his torso, everything. And when I tried to wash his body, I ended up fainting twice. So they took me out of the room. We saw his body, Bona, and there was so much bruises everywhere throughout it that, you know, we had more questions than answers. And to this day, we have more questions than answers. And about the 50 bruises, I like to highlight too. Not one of these 50 bruises was inflicted by Soleiman. All were inflicted by the guards.
Just out of curiosity, how can you be sure of that? Like, just maybe people might be questioning.
That's what the coroner said.
So the coroner's
This is the coroner's report.
Mm.
This is not coming from us.
Mm-hmm.
This is not coming from us.
Yeah. So once you see his body, is there an official? I'm asking because I'm also not really sure of the process, but is there an autopsy that's done immediately? Like, is it instantly that you're able to kind of quantify how he died?
So basically, that report, as I alluded to, that took 8 months, that's what gave us all these facts. We were not able to be told how he died until the coroner's report. And that coroner's report gave his cause of death as unascertained, which effectively means, my understanding is that they don't know what led to the physical blow. Like
they don't know which bruise.
Which bruise, the fatal blow. And so, which brings us to our other point, Bona, I don't know if you're going to ask, but the police did also their investigation.
Right.
And they argued that we can't press, like, you know, we're not, there's no grounds for charges. We don't know the cause of death.
So in a way, that kind of vague coroner's report, or that vague conclusion they came to, is a loophole for the police to then not really do much. Because if they don't have a real cause of death, if they don't suspect foul play, there's no need for them to investigate.
You know, what's important about that is, like, Soleiman just didn't roll over and die. The 50 bruises are compelling. They're enough for you. That at bare minimum, as my lawyer articulated, that's for assault, bare minimum, assault. And, you know, the police making that, the idea that, like, oh, we can't press charges because it's the cause of death is unascertained, frankly, is inexcusable. It's inexcusable. The coroner, did their important work. They highlighted the compelling evidence. I don't know what anyone else would say, but if you do this to someone on the street, what would happen? If I go do this to you on the street
and I have 50 bruises.
Yeah, 50 bruises. What do you think will happen, Bona?
Yeah. But I think it's also very troubling that your brother is obviously a person of color. He has a Muslim name. He's also visibly Muslim, right? Maybe people haven't seen pictures of him, but, he had a big beard. He was a person who looked like a Muslim. I almost feel like, and that town, by the way, for people that aren't aware of this, the geography we're talking about, is a very small white town. Lindsay, Ontario is like, it's not Toronto. It's not the diverse cultures we're used to here. It's a very segregated kind of white community that may not have been necessarily sympathetic to someone of his, situation. Am I correct in saying that?
My perspective on that is that Soleiman deserved better, Bona. My perspective on that is that Soleiman needed help, and instead they gave him fists and cuffs. He needed a bed and a doctor. They did not treat him with the way, someone who has a mental illness should be treated with respect and decency, Bona. Mm-hmm. But the whole way how my family's been treated, here's a Canadian man who gets killed under government care, and the family's still waiting for answers. That's problematic.
And was there immediately, because your family did the right thing, hiring a lawyer, on your end, working the system. And I think it's important to note that you're a savvy person. Like, you are not the average Joe on the streets who, some immigrant family this might happen to, they don't know the language. They are not able to articulate what's happening to their family. You're a very savvy person. So the fact that you're able to navigate the system, you understand and know the system, it makes this much more interesting because you were immediately able to put a lot of pressure onto the system.
my background in being that I have a BA in political science, Bona, for me, because I've studied this field, I felt like, I needed to get a lawyer. I mean, that was important. And alhamdulillah, we have a very competent and a very talented team of lawyers. But I always see myself, Bona, as just another brother, because the only thing I'm confident in myself is I'm a fighter. The person that was special was Soleiman. But what I want to be clear for everybody as well to know is that, like, I'm not doing this just for Soleiman. I'm doing this for the voiceless. There's people across this country and across the world, actually, that deserve better, that are suffering from mental illness, and oftentimes they're just given to their families in body bags. And I want to honor Soleiman and these other individuals that have suffered, by fighting. I want to honor them, their stories to be heard, so we don't have another story like this. Right?
What's interesting to me is that your story very much reminds me of Emmett Till. Are you familiar with the story of Emmett Till?
Yes, the tragedy of Emmett Till.
The tragedy of Emmett Till. He was a young African-American boy in the, I believe he was in the South in the U.S., and he was killed, eventually lynched. He was like kind of attacked, gang attack by this, group of white men who, assumed that he had made some kind of pass at a white woman. Many years later, by the way, before she died, the woman recanted her story and said, actually, he didn't pass at me at all.
Yes.
But one thing that Emmett Till's mother did, which was very interesting, is that because he was very, very badly beaten and, was almost unrecognizable, she had an open casket funeral for him. And when people asked her, why would you do that? Why would you, show people this? She said, I want people to see this so that they understand what we're living with. And so his picture was put on the front page of major newspapers across America. And many people say that was kind of the spark of, what you call the civil rights movement, or it was something that really got the attention. It resonated with people, because when people actually had an idea of what happened to this young boy, it brought that issue so much closer to them. Why I say this about you and your family is that, your ability to navigate the system and speak about your brother's case with so much passion, it almost feels like, not to say you were chosen for this, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is wise, right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows why things happen. But, I feel like perhaps, you being in the situation, it will be a catalyst for other families, for other people to not have to go through something similar. That people will have an advocate like yourself who's not just looking out for your brother's case, as you mentioned, but really trying to advocate for people who are in that circumstance. But going back to your brother's case, once the 8 months passed and you were given this coroner's report, what were the steps then after that? How did that work? So you'd found out that, 50 bruises, they didn't have a definite cause of death. But what were the steps after that your family took?
So we were told by the police that they would make a decision with respect to the case, with respect to the investigation, whether they'll press criminal charges or not. And a couple of months later, their investigation took almost a year. End of October. A year, yeah.
And that's the police in that local town?
The Quarter Lakes Police Service investigating the Lindsay jail. So it was the local police investigating the local jail. And they ended up taking almost 11 months, almost a year, and they sent an email to our lawyers, not even a meeting, but an email to our lawyers saying there's no grounds for charges. There are no grounds for charges.
And did they tell you what their investigation looked like? Did they speak with?
So that's the other important point here, Bona, is that my lawyer asked them, we need to see the police report. And what ended up happening was they said, well, go apply, do a Freedom of Information request.
Really?
For the police report. So my lawyers did that. And they applied for this report, the report that encompasses what they did for that 11 months. And they a couple weeks later, after they applied for the report, they were denied access to the police report.
So the police told them to apply, and then they were denied when they applied?
Yeah, by the police report. And it was only after getting there's an organ of government called the Information Privacy Commissioner that my lawyers got involved in, did we get partial access to the police report. We got partial access to the police report where we saw some of the work that they did.
Okay.
Right. But this, now just imagine this, like you have a loved one that's been dead more than a year in this violent circumstance, you know, that certain compelling facts, and you still, you know, the family still has to fight to get this information. Like this lack of transparency is quite astounding, actually. And we only after we got the Information Privacy Commissioner involved did we get partial access to the police report.
And what did that partial access look like?
You know, when we saw in that report, Soleiman suffered a lot. They mocked him, they humiliated him. There's certain things, Bona, that I saw in that report that I try not to talk about to honor him. We had a horrible time in those 11 days. The brother that I knew for most of my life is the brother that I want to keep in my imagination. Those 11 days was a horrible end to his life. And I try not to think about those details of those 11 days because, you know, Soleiman had his dignity, had his humble pride, you know, if you know what I mean, had his intelligence, he had his beauty. And all that was taken away from him. His health wasn't good, from my understanding of the report. It was horrible.
So they actually interviewed guards. Did they interview any prisoners? Any people that were locked up or in
my understanding, they interviewed guards, prisoners, other support staff.
Okay.
Yeah. But the problem in itself, Bona, is why does the family keep having to fight to get this information? But what's also important is for the audience to know, just recently, about 8 months ago, an eyewitness came forward.
Okay.
An eyewitness that came forward that was across Soleiman's cell that saw everything. The police never really spoke with this fella. So this is very important because he's across the cell. I asked the question is, how do you close the case without speaking to the eyewitness?
So he came forward on his own?
He came forward on his own. The Fifth Estate did an investigation.
Wow. CBC's Fifth Estate is a show.
The Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, that's Canada's equivalent of 60 Minutes.
Yeah.
You know, did an investigation piece, and this fella came out and recanted of what he saw. He recanted of what he saw, and he saw, what happened to Soleiman. And it was as a result of this eyewitness, this fella, Mr. John Thibault, that there's now a new police investigation.
So he initially said he hadn't seen anything, or you mean?
That's what my understanding. That's what my understanding is from the Fifth Estate piece. But the thing is, Bona, if someone is across the cell and sees everything, would you not think it's in the best interest of the case to talk to this fella to get information, to understand of what happened?
Well, maybe also he knew better than to say something.
Yeah,
that seems more plausible. That
he said that as well. But would you not want to follow up with him? I agree with what you're saying, Bona.
Yeah, I mean, in the sense that in that moment, he might have felt like his life was also in danger. If he had just seen, what had happened to another prisoner, it's probably why he waited, because he got released, I'm assuming, and eventually then was able to kind of speak more free.
Yeah, but then my question to you now, Bona, and I think it's a very fair point. Question is, would it not be in the best interest to go and follow up with this fellow?
Oh, well, it's sad that CBC had to do that groundwork. That we rely on, instead of the government institutions doing their own dirty work, news and journalists are the ones kind of cracking cases on their behalf.
It's important. The CBC did great work, and even the coroner's office, in their fulsome report, that's the organ of government that's been very decent. Decent to my family, in terms of the work that they did when they gave a very comprehensive report. But the other thing that we should also, keep in mind and understand is that the guards that were involved in Soleiman's death, from a ministry's internal investigation, they were fired.
Oh, they were fired.
The guards were fired. Yes, they were.
And there were
charged.
still no charges pressed against them.
So that investigation, I believe, was after when there was no charges pressed.
Okay.
So now the case, the Ontario Provincial Police, which is the organ of government, the police, the provincial level of police, that has carriage over the case now. That is now, doing a second investigation.
So it's gone up the ranks as opposed to the municipal police, the local police. And also that is kind of strange that the local police are investigating basically another local police body.
A local institution, because the jail and the police are different.
Right.
But now you have the provincial police investigating the Lindsay jail, the guards. So that's where the case is at now. But it took more than 2 years to get where we are. Now we're approaching the 3-year anniversary.
And what did this inmate, the one who's across the cell, what did he say? What did he come forward with in that?
My understanding is when I saw the piece in the CBC is that one of his quotes was, "They viciously beat him to death." One thing he said is that Soleiman one time tried to get up a couple times, and the only area he could run to is to the wall.
Do they not have any cameras or anything?
My understanding is that there's a camera of Soleiman being walked across the hall into his cell. I have not seen that family. My family has not seen that camera, but there's no footage of the cell itself.
But why haven't you had access to that footage?
To be honest with you, Bona, that photo, for me to see Soleiman in that area, it's very difficult.
Oh no! Yeah. I'm saying, I'm not that you'd want to see it, but I'm saying that your family lawyers, for example, if they had access to that footage.
My family lawyers, with respect to that footage, they know of that video. But right now, what we're hoping to do is we're hoping to see is for the guards to be held accountable, for them to be charged.
Yeah,
they have to be charged, not just for Soleiman, not just for people in this province, but for Canadians at large. This case is important in that this could have literally happened to anyone, Bona. And the violent end of his life is unacceptable. He was the custodian of the state.
But also the fact that there seems like there is really no accountability by the people who are the jail staff. But what about the police and their negligence of actually taking care of the case? The police that have come up with inconclusive results based on very overwhelming evidence. I mean, this man had 50 bruises, gash on his head. Clearly, like you said, he didn't just fall, onto the wall. What about the police? Are they, or could they be held liable for their, their own kind of lack of taking this serious? My
question to the Kawartha Lakes Police Service is, why weren't charges pressed?
Yeah,
I challenge them to answer me that question. But for me, I'm focusing on the future ahead. Bona, I'm happy that the case is with the Ontario Provincial Police. I'm happy that we have a second investigation, and I believe it's important for the word that you just articulated, accountability, for us to have that. Because if we don't have accountability, that effectively means that this is okay, that this is all right to do. Two things that have been absent in this case has been accountability and transparency, which more often than not is happens quite often in other cases as well. With no accountability, no transparency.
I'm assuming especially in cases like this when people are killed in prison.
I asked you a question, Bona. When's the last time you know of a guard being charged?
Yeah.
You could count with your fingers, right? Of guards being charged. I mean, these are, what we also have to remember, these are taxpayer-funded individuals. Yeah. They work for us, right? We citizens of this province and this country, we are taxpayers that fund these guards, right? This is very important. They work for us.
What was the response? What has been the response from the Muslim community? I know obviously there have been advocates outside the Muslim community who have kind of come to the aid of your family. Internally, within the Muslim community, within the Afghani community, within your local kind of world here, what has that support looked like?
I'll be honest. I'm very grateful to my community, to the Muslim community, and to my fellow Canadians. Canadians at large. There's been a lot of support with respect to the micro part of the Muslim community. Um, um, there's some incredible leaders in our community that have come to support my family. But when it comes to to mental illness, there's a great organization called Nasia that's done some work on mental illness, that are literally being the pioneers. But I think as a community, we're behind other communities within Canada.
Oh, yeah.
And we had to fight long and hard to get the attention of the Muslim community. But alhamdulillah, the community is behind us. The community is rooting for us, and Canadians at large, outside of the Muslim community, have really, come in droves in terms of their support, because when they hear about Soleiman's story, they can picture this happening to their loved one. And when I've traveled across the nation, I've had families telling me, what can we do to help? Or families telling me about their own personal story. And that inspires me to continue.
So tell me about that work, because you have been traveling, and you've become a public speaker, based off the back of this. People are inviting you now to come to their cities and talk about your brother's legacy. What has that journey been like? How did that take place?
I always say to people that I've become the accidental activist or advocate. I never envisioned this kind of a life. I always say to people, I'm a very simple man. I have my, to be honest, to bring us back to earth, my simple pleasures. I'm a big European football fan. I wanted to just have a family and do what I needed to do. But this is something I see as like fighting for justice, in a country that I believe in the people in the country, and as I've traveled across the country, what I've noticed is I've made incredible allies and friends from different walks of life, different perspectives. But every talk I give, Bona, is painful. Every talk I give reminds me of Soleiman, Allah yarhamu's painful death. But every talk I give leads me closer of getting more therapy, like gives me closer to healing a bit more, in the sense that, talking about him, about this tragedy, is that like he's right beside me. He's whispering to me, Yusuf, keep going. When I think of the beginning, I sometimes question of hope. I did not know where this was going to go. I had no idea. And then there were some incredible people in the community that, if they're listening, God bless their soul. They came and they guided me. They became my mentors, that taught me, both Muslims and non-Muslims, that told me how to go about this. And if it wasn't for these, handful of individuals, we wouldn't be here today. I owe it to them, and I am here today because, these individuals believed in me. They believed in sharing Soleiman's story, and ultimately they had hope, for something better, for a better society that one day can be envisioned. As a public speaker, I don't know if I would call myself a public speaker. I give these talks. I just, say to myself, you have a duty and obligation, Yusuf. You don't choose this, you have to do it. Because don't forget that not everybody has a tongue. Don't forget that not everybody's heart, is allowed to be free, in the sense that they have so much other tragedies. Here I am, I'm a male, man in my 30s that, I have an opportunity to speak, and there's other people that don't have this privilege. So I also accept that, right? At the same time, I truly believe in my heart and also in my conviction that what we're doing, what we've embarked in with the Justice for Soleiman movement, it's going to leave a legacy to honor Soleiman, and also, more importantly, that his legacy will find a way to reform the system in a way that the system will take people with mental illness seriously, we'll treat people with mental illness seriously, because at the end of the day, that's what the end goal is. But when Soleiman, Allah yarhamu, is gone, you know, but we're here. And we have to ask ourselves a question is, what are you going to do about this situation? You have two options. You accept it and go on with your life. Or you rise to the occasion and in your humble way, you speak to it. And in your humble way, you try to, in a small way, inspire people. And if you can inspire people, know that these people are inspired, not by you, but by the circumstances of this horrible injustice. You know, it's always important, as we say in Arabic, ikhlas, to remain sincere. This movement has taken a lot from me as well, personally. You know, I like to share this, my own marriage collapsed, you know, because I think it's important to share this with the audience, because, you know, there's been a lot of learning for myself as well, right? You know, sometimes these difficulties come because you're tested, and, you know, it didn't come without a price, Bona. You know,
how's your rest of your family taking it? I mean, I know you have, like you mentioned, you know, younger nephews and nieces, and your sisters and brothers and your parents. How have they adjusted to life, you know, in this campaign? Are they involved? How does that look?
You know, my family is involved in this campaign to a certain extent, in the sense that, you know, when we have vigils and sometimes some of the talks, my siblings come. But by and large, you know, as a family, I've let my family grieve, you know, in the best way they can, because, you know, they deserve that, especially my mom and dad. Things have been difficult in terms of like their reaction, in terms of how they dealt. Like, I'll give you an example. My father often, you know, cries himself to sleep. My mom always, you know, more often than not asks me, Yusuf, what happened to my son? You know, are these guards going to be charged? I mean, and I'm often, you know, I often give my mom the same response, Mom, we gotta wait. But then I turn the question is like, is that really a good enough answer you give to the mother, to the mother of, you know, of the person who buried their child? You know, like, you know, she buried her child. You know, and that's all I can give my mom. Sometimes it's shameful. For me, I feel ashamed telling her that. My sister barely goes to see my brother's grave because she's traumatized. You know, my two nephews and two nieces, you know, one of the nephews, Musa, my Soleiman, Allah yarhamu, named him. And, you know, I always, whenever I say Musa's name, I'm always reminded of Soleiman, because, you know, he was his favorite, but my niece Fatima always, and Ibrahim, the two oldest one, Ibrahim and Fatima always ask about Soleiman, and when I take them to the grave, you know, they make dua for him too. But you know, I get pain from them in the sense that, like, you know, there's not going to be any milestones for us to celebrate with him. They loved him a lot, and he would spend a lot of time with his nephews and nieces. He actually spent more time with my nephews and nieces than any of my other siblings. So he left a legacy for them.
And so they still remember him.
They remember him quite vividly, actually. You know.
How old are they, if you don't mind me asking?
Fatima, Ibrahim is 9, Fatima is 6. Musa just turned 5, and Hajra is 3.
So this only happened 3 years ago. So they still
barely
remember.
3 years ago. Yeah. They know him quite well, especially Musa, especially Fatima and Ibrahim. You know.
And how do you even explain that to them? I mean, that's such a.
Yeah, you know, it's you know, I know one day they'll see the details, but sometimes you know, I send some of the interviews that I give to my family, and they watch it. You know, they say Mama, which means uncle in Farsi. It's like, oh, you went to Winnipeg, you went to Montreal, we saw you here, and you know, so they see some of these snippets, and oftentimes in these interviews, you know, they see me in tears, and you know, I feel like, you know, them seeing these things, like it has traumatized them as well, you know.
So how do you take care of yourself? I mean, obviously this is a very emotionally draining journey you've been on, and I can only assume, just hearing you, and I've obviously spoken to you about this in the past, but hearing your zeal for this case, and the fact that you're always pushing forward, and you're making contacts, constantly networking, trying to work whatever angle you can. Like, how do you stay afloat?
Bona, it's brothers like yourself that I need to learn more from in terms of like that balance. I'll be honest with you. I will give myself a failing grade in terms of like doing that balance. I haven't really done a good job about. I'm getting better at it. I go to the gym. A few days a week. Worship. My spiritual. I pray. I do my prayers. But sometimes, Bona, we subconsciously make the mistake of situations like this consuming us, of not being able to really differentiate between personal versus private life, right? And so I often find myself sometimes where I just turn off the social media and just not deal with it for like a day, like for like a few hours, because like it's just too much.
No, but I mean, a few hours, even, that's not really a break.
No, it's not a break. And to be honest with you, I actually haven't taken much of a break. The only break I took in the last 3 years actually was when I went overseas just this past summer. I haven't really taken much of a break, and all my friends, my confidants and close people to me, they said, Yusuf, you need to take a break, but sometimes my response is, do I have much of a time to take a break? Right.
I know it sucks because obviously, you're leading the campaign. So there's a lot kind of that's resting on your shoulders. You need to constantly be making decisions on the campaign's behalf. But like as a brother as well, and I think I've told this to you, and I'm just saying it because I'm sure there are many people who can relate. Sometimes we are so, whether it's da'wah, whether it's, we're so caught up in things. But you are a human being. You're only made of flesh and bones. Eventually that type of wear and tear takes its toll on people.
Absolutely.
So I wish there was more support for you, so that you didn't feel like you had to do so much. I wish there were more people in our community or more resources that we could pour into your campaign, into your work, so that you didn't feel like there was so much pressure on you. Because I know you feel like a lot is resting on you, obviously, because you've kind of taken the face of this campaign.
It's a good point, Bona. There's certain individuals in this community that are doing the work of thousands of people, and if it wasn't even for these few that have been there for me, we have some amazing people in our community. I just wish more people, can do some of this work. If it wasn't for them, I actually wouldn't even be here today. But at the same time, I asked myself the question as Yusuf, if you don't, who else will? Right? And Yusuf, you've been given an opportunity. Rise to it. Take it. You're doing something, you're attempting to do something decent. And inshallah, it's accepted, and you do it in a sincere way. And there is some amazing people in our community that have come to help me, but and I'm grateful for them. And it's a community that I think we're still in influx, and I think many years down the road, I think another 10 years, we will get better at mental illness. But I also believe the reason I'm putting this much effort and time, and I have a team as well, Bona, behind me, is that we are at a crossroads as a community to be able to deal with our mental illness situation. And this is very important as a community. We have no choice but to get better. We have no choice but to improve and be able to, support loved ones that have had mental illness, because more often than not, by stigmatizing them, we create even an extra layer to these individuals that ultimately are left lurching on the street, and they need the support. It's our job as a community. It's not a question of we should or could we. It's we have to.
The Prophet ﷺ said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala only tests the people that he loves. If you can take comfort in anything, hopefully, inshallah, this is a sign from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Your brother's unfortunate circumstances, we asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make him a shaheed. He was killed without justice, without due process and cause, and he was killed at the hands of people who have not been held accountable. So, hopefully Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will accept him as a shaheed, and you yourself tirelessly going out and advocating on his behalf. I hope this is a sign that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he loves you, because he's testing you in this way.
Ameen.
Because he only tests the people that he loves.
Ameen.
And I said this in the beginning, that I don't think most people would be able to carry this burden. I don't think most people would rise to the occasion. And in many ways, your story, and of course, it hasn't finished yet. I'm not ending a chapter for you. It's almost like a hero's journey. If you're familiar with, I'm a storyteller, I'm a filmmaker. So this is a typical arc you see in stories where the hero character is never the one who chooses their destiny. It's never the one who someone says, I want to become a hero, right? It's one of those things that it's the circumstance that leads them to that understanding. And you've come to that understanding in full circle, that this is not one of those things that you necessarily had a choice in. It was like, you're equipped, you have the ability, and I think, and I've said this to you before, that it was a blessing and a curse for your family to go through this. But I think that you being as savvy as you are, understanding the system, being able to become that advocate was like the worst thing that ever happened to those people, to those, the prison officials, or the people who didn't press charges, the police officers, because they've made a really bad enemy. It's not like those people in our communities who just bow down to pressure and we don't ask questions. You've really put a lot of pressure on them. And I hope and I pray, inshallah, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows us to be, a major asset for you on the Day of Judgment.
Ameen.
That, you're able to see the benefit of all the dhulm you've been able to prevent, all the oppression, all the harm coming to people innocently, that you've been able to kind of circumvent and navigate around, inshallah, for a few people who come in the future. But I don't want to end on a sad note. I want to end on a positive note, because this is really, although we're talking about your brother's death, we still, we should celebrate his life, because he lived a beautiful life. Even though it was struck with tragedy, he himself was a person who obviously left a very important, he left a very important legacy in your life and in your family's life. What would you want people to know about your brother? If they could meet this person who, was maybe deemed as dangerous, or however those police officers or people viewed him, what would you want people to know about your brother?
Soleiman can be remembered for a lot of things, but there's a few that always stand out and have remained a trademark of him, and that was his devotion to his family, his humility in appreciating the simple things in life, his constant thirst and zealousness for knowledge, and ultimately his appreciation of life. Soleiman did not have much, Bona, but he was very generous with what he could give. And when I look at him and I look at his life, that smile, he would always make jokes with me. He said, Yusuf, because sometimes I would be the grumpy brother, and he would all be smiling. He said, it's sunnah to smile. So get out of here, Solomon. And he would, he said, just smile, Yusuf. It's sadaqah. And I said, I don't want to hear this right now, Solomon. It's sometimes you're coming after work.
Yeah.
And I look at that now, and I say alhamdulillah, it's things like that I remember, and that I always want people to remember him, like his knowledge, his ability to be able to, devote his life to his family and his faith, and his generosity, And I want to take these aspects of Soleiman and apply it to anyone else who is suffering from mental illness, because anyone who is suffering from mental illness, they have these gifts and much more, right? And we have to celebrate these gifts. We have to celebrate these parts of people with mental illness that have so many of these gifts. We got to stop, giving them a black mark. We have to stop letting the illness define them. And unfortunately, we as a society are behind. As a community, we have to take leadership from other communities when it comes to mental illness. And a very important fact is mental illness is higher among people that come from war-torn countries.
Yeah.
So the numbers are higher among Somalis, Afghanis, Syrians, Iraqis, right? And so it's even more reason for us to work hard with mental illness. And the CF, for example, is a great organization that does that, but we need to do more. And inshallah, Soleiman's life, we'll remember what I just told you, but also, we can make a reform in the system.
Inshallah.
Bona, this movement, there's 15 of us. We have lots of work that we've done. We give the speaking tours. We have a petition. We have we have a petition. We have speaking tours. We have research papers that we've done already. We have a social media following. there's a lot of work. And what's incredible, and this is also Soleiman's legacy, the members of the team come from all diverse perspectives. And there's about 15 of us. And we have different occupational backgrounds and demographic backgrounds. And that speaks volumes who Soleiman was,
Well, I mean, the fact that I came out of the blue and I reached out to you, and, that tells you that, even though I was on the outside, I didn't really have any connection with you. But, there are a lot of people like me who feel connected to you, even though we're not, we may not be from your specific community, but, you are our brother, and Soleiman was our brother. So if this happens to a person within our family, we should have the same zeal. We should be just as enthusiastic about helping that situation. But you mentioned all these different things. You mentioned you have the petition. You mentioned the campaign. How can people actually support you now? Now is the nitty gritty. If people want to actually support your brother's cause in case, what can they do to help?
Bona, if people are, we're still raising about $50,000 to cover a legal case.
An immense amount of legal work that's obviously been done.
Legal work, and we have a launch good that you could put on the podcast after.
What's the is it just launch good / something?
Yeah, I'll send it to you. Launch good / Justice for Sully.
Justice for Sully. Yeah, we'll make sure we put it on the description.
People can donate to our campaign because we're still trying to raise funds for that. They can sign our petition. If anybody's watching that's listening, wanna feel free to share my contacts with them. We're still looking for volunteers. We're looking for 2 hours of commitment. I have a campaign head, and so we've done interviews with all media in Canada. We've done interviews with Al Jazeera as well. So that's another way people can help us. And ultimately, the other way someone can help us is, besides following our social media, is, keeping us in their du'as. Keeping me, my family, Soleiman, du'as. This is a very, alhamdulillah for this test, but it's, pray that Allah keeps us ikhlas, sincere, and and we're able to continue this fight.
May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, bless your brother with the highest levels of Jannat al-Firdaus.
Ameen.
Accept him as shaheed. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow this work that you're doing to be heavy on your scale of good deeds. That all the khair and time and effort and blood, sweat and tears that you've been putting in, that it's a means of sincere change. That the people around us are able to benefit because of this legacy that you and your family have left behind. So we ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept it from you. And I really do ask and request, brothers and sisters that are watching this or listening to this, to contribute something. Whether it be, sharing the link, whether it be getting involved. People can invite you to their local communities. You've spoken, you've spoken in MSAs, universities, masajid as well.
Yeah, masajid. Some masajids. We've started a law school tour. We've spoken at community centers across the nation: Vancouver, Montreal, Ottawa, Kingston.
So people should look out
Halifax.
for. People should, if you're in a community that. And I've seen his presentation as well. I've actually attended, and I've heard his case, repeatedly, and his passion for it. And I think as Muslims specifically, we have a duty to really, get behind this campaign, and this should be justice for our brother. And this is the least that we can do. Everyone can do their part. Not everyone has to, become a lawyer and go to the courts or whatever, but everyone could do something.
Absolutely.
Right. Everyone has a role to play. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, accept it from you and from all the people that have been working behind the scenes, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make things easy for you and your family. And I definitely keep you guys in my dua.
Ameen.
And I ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, keep your family steadfast upon deen and in good health and strength, inshallah, through this time. And I appreciate you giving me your time. I know we scheduled this mine. We scheduled this a few times, and I know that we kept having scheduling issues.
It's my fault, brother.
No.
Mine.
It wasn't your fault. Mine. It was mutually. We just scheduling didn't work out, but I'm happy we were able to do it today. So jazakallah khair, akhi, for coming today and for sharing your story with us. And I know it's difficult to recount over and over again, but I want people to hear about this.
Absolutely.
And it's important that we don't, like I said in the beginning, we don't push this under the rug and turn this into something that people just forget about over time.
Yeah, and for the audience listening, if there's anything I can do to support any family member that you have, know that I'm with you. Just call me or reach out to Brother Bona. I'm happy to support. Sure. If there's anything I can advise or assist. If any audience has a loved one suffering, please know that I'm here with you.
Inshallah. I'll put all the information, all the details in the description of the video as well. You can find out more information just through my social media, and we'll make sure that you check out. There's a website as well.
Yes, justiceforsolly.com.
Justiceforsolly.com.
And we have Facebook as well, Justice for Solly.
Justice for
and
Solly
Instagram.
And Instagram. So make sure, inshallah, you connect with them. Jazakallah khair for your time. Thank you very much for watching and listening for this. It was a bit longer than usual, but I think it was important for us to get this all out. But thank you very much for tuning in. Inshallah, we'll see you again next time. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.